Ava's voice cut through the buzzing crowd like a sudden storm. "Clear the area now. No one will stand in my way." What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The terminal buzzed with the low hum of engines and the murmur of travelers. Early morning light filtered through the tall glass walls, casting soft, shifting patterns on the polished floor. The scent of strong coffee and warm pastries mingled with the faint aroma of jet fuel, setting a tone that was both comforting and charged with anticipation. Every sound, from the rolling suitcases to the distant calls of gate agents, wove together to create a tapestry of human stories that began and ended in this place. Among the bustling crowd moved Ava, an air hostess whose strict manner and no-nonsense approach had become her trademark. Today, as always, she navigated the busy terminal with a determined stride, her eyes scanning the scene with a blend of vigilance and weariness. Ava had spent many years in the service industry, learning that order was not just a job requirement, but a shield against the chaos of life. Her face, set in a mask of quiet intensity, bore the marks of long shifts and personal trials, yet her eyes still shone with a spark of resilience. Even as she dealt with difficult passengers and unpredictable situations, a part of her remained hopeful that every new day would bring a chance to set things right. On a busy day like this, every detail mattered. In the crowded boarding area, passengers jostled for position, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Amid the chaos, a small scene began to unfold near one of the boarding gates. A young boy, hardly more than a toddler, sat on the cold floor with his head bowed and tears streaming down his cheeks. His sobs, soft yet piercing, drew the attention of many around him. The child's name was Malik, and his tiny body trembled as he struggled against an unknown fear that gripped him so completely. His big, dark eyes reflected a mix of confusion and sorrow that went far beyond his years. Malik's mother, Imani, stood a few paces away, her posture rigid and her gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. Imani was not just any passenger. She was the owner of the airline that now bore the weight of her legacy. Despite her success, she carried the burden of high expectations and the constant pressure of managing both her business and personal life. Her face was composed, yet beneath that calm exterior lay a storm of emotions. A fierce protectiveness for her child and an unwavering resolve to stand up for what was right. Imani's eyes followed Malik's every sob and glance, her heart pounding with a mixture of worry and determination. As Ava moved through the crowd, her routine suddenly shifted. A subtle disturbance caught her attention, a disturbance that would soon cascade into events no one could have foreseen. A passenger, visibly agitated by the disruption, began to murmur complaints about the commotion. Ava's training took over. She moved quickly toward the source of the noise, her steps measured but firm. In her mind, the need for discipline and control was paramount, and she had little patience for disturbances that unsettled the order she so carefully maintained. Ava approached Malik's mother and the crying toddler with a mix of authority and concern. In a voice that was both commanding and soft, she addressed the situation. "Sir, ma'am, please step aside. We must keep the boarding area clear for everyone." Her tone left little room for argument, and many passengers glanced at her in a mixture of respect and apprehension. Imani's eyes flashed for a moment, not with anger, but with a quiet, simmering intensity that hinted at the depth of her conviction. "I have been waiting for my flight, and my son is safe here," she replied evenly. There was an underlying firmness in her words that spoke of experience and hard-earned wisdom. Despite her calm, the tremor in her voice betrayed a deep-seated worry that no polite request could entirely mask. The tension in the air grew palpably heavier as Ava's eyes fell upon the toddler. In a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, Ava's hand shot out in a swift, impulsive motion. Without warning, her palm met Malik's soft cheek, and a sharp sound echoed, a sound that seemed out of place amidst the usual background noise of the terminal. Malik's cry deepened, and the shock rippled through the small group that had gathered. Time appeared to slow as every onlooker processed what had just happened. The terminal, once filled with the comfortable hum of everyday routine, now vibrated with a sudden electric charge. Ava's face, momentarily frozen in disbelief at her own actions, reflected a jumble of regret and stubbornness. In that fleeting moment, she had lost control, and the consequences of that loss of temper were about to unfold in ways she could not imagine. A murmur of discontent spread among the passengers, and some began to whisper, their words barely audible yet filled with unease. Among those who watched with concern was a fellow crew member, a quiet and thoughtful man named Daniel. Daniel had often seen the cracks beneath Ava's tough exterior, the hidden battles she fought daily to keep her emotions in check. Now, as he witnessed the impact of her impulsive act, his heart sank. He stepped forward, intending to calm the situation and restore a semblance of order, but the energy in the space was already charged with emotion. Malik, small and vulnerable, flinched as his tears mingled with the shock of the slap. His delicate face crumpled further, and his sobs grew louder. Yet even in his distress, there was something resilient in the way his tiny body trembled, a silent plea for comfort and understanding that went far beyond the immediate pain. Imani's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her calm veneer now cracking to reveal a burning anger. "How dare you?" she said in a voice that was both controlled and fierce. There was a quiet power in her tone, a power that came from years of holding herself together against forces that had once tried to break her. Her gaze locked with Ava's, and in that moment a silent storm began to build between them, one that would shape the events to come. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. The crowd, once so engrossed in their individual routines, now found themselves caught in the gravity of the situation. Passengers exchanged glances, some filled with sympathy for the distressed child and his mother, others with a sense of dismay at the unfolding public scene. Daniel moved closer to Imani, offering a soft word of apology on behalf of the airline, though his eyes revealed that he too felt the weight of what had transpired. Ava's mind raced, trying to justify the sudden outburst. She recalled years of standing by strict rules, of enforcing regulations that kept the delicate balance of order intact. Yet, in that instant, the rules had faltered against the raw tide of emotion. Her training battled with her instincts, and as she looked at Malik's tear-stained face, a realization began to dawn, one that hinted at consequences far greater than a simple disciplinary action. The background chatter of the terminal slowly resumed its place, but the incident had left an indelible mark. Every passenger who had witnessed the scene was now a silent participant in the unfolding drama, their thoughts lingering on the fragile nature of human temper and the unseen forces that drive us all. The air felt charged, heavy with a sense of foreboding that made each heartbeat count a little faster. In the midst of the unfolding tension, Daniel found a quiet moment to speak softly to Ava, his tone gentle yet firm. "Ava, sometimes our actions speak louder than our intentions. Please think of the child and his mother. There is more at stake here than just rules." His words, simple and heartfelt, resonated deeply within her, stirring emotions that she had long kept buried under layers of professionalism. Ava's eyes searched Daniel's face, seeking understanding and perhaps a hint of forgiveness. Yet the pride that had defined her all these years fought to maintain control. She hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing down upon her as she grappled with a mix of duty and the unforeseen impact of her actions. The corridor of the terminal, lined with benches and digital displays, now served as a silent witness to the internal battle raging within her. Meanwhile, Imani's composure was a testament to the strength that had carried her through many trials. Every line on her face, every controlled breath, spoke of a life lived under the glare of expectations and judgments. As she looked at Malik, whose small body shook with each sob, she felt a surge of protective fury. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she would never allow harm to come to her child, not on her watch. Though her voice remained steady, the passion behind her words was unmistakable. I will not stand by and let this happen to my son, she declared, her gaze unyielding as she met Ava's eyes once more. The space between them thickened with an unspoken promise, a promise that the actions of the moment were only the beginning of a confrontation that would reach far beyond the walls of the terminal. In that brief silence, every detail took on new meaning. The glint of determination in Imani's eyes, the hesitant remorse flickering in Ava's, and the raw, vulnerable distress of little Malik all intertwined to create a moment that would echo in the days to come. Outside the glass walls, the world continued on, unaware of the storm brewing inside. The steady rhythm of life, with its own ups and downs, carried on in contrast to the charged emotions within. Yet for those who had been present, the ordinary had shifted. The incident was not just a lapse in discipline, it was a crack in the facade of a well-ordered system, a moment that hinted at deeper fractures lying beneath the surface. The voices around the terminal began to merge into a single, low tone of concern and anticipation. Some passengers whispered among themselves, recalling past experiences of similar confrontations, while others simply stared, their expressions a mix of disbelief and compassion. The young boy's cries seemed to echo louder in the silence that followed, each sound a reminder of innocence disrupted. Ava stepped back for a moment, her hand still trembling from the impact of what she had done. She looked around, her eyes searching for something to anchor her thoughts, a reminder of why she had chosen this career and how the smallest lapse could alter the lives of those around her. In that instant, the world narrowed to the delicate balance between duty and humanity, and she found herself caught in the middle of a conflict that was far more personal than any routine check of a boarding pass. In a quiet corner near a row of seats, a young woman named Lila listened intently. Lila was one of the many who had found herself in the midst of the day's rush, her curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in energy. With gentle eyes and a kind smile, Lila had often comforted anxious travelers with a few soft words or a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Today, she observed the scene with a mix of empathy and quiet concern, her thoughts turning to the little boy and his distressed mother. Though she remained silent, her presence was a small beacon of kindness amidst the tension. As the minutes passed, the terminal slowly began to settle back into a routine of its own, albeit one marked by an undercurrent of tension. The earlier commotion had not dissipated completely. Instead, it simmered just below the surface, a reminder that what had happened could not simply be brushed aside. In this charged atmosphere, every gesture and word carried extra weight, as if the air itself were infused with the possibility of further conflict. Ava finally spoke, her voice soft and laden with regret. "I did not mean to hurt him," she said, almost to herself, her eyes fixed on Malik. The admission was quiet but sincere, a rare moment of vulnerability from someone known for her strictness. Daniel, standing close by, offered a small nod in silent acknowledgement, understanding that sometimes even the strongest among them could falter. Imani, hearing Ava's words, felt a complex mix of emotions. Her heart ached for the child, yet she also recognized the human frailty in the air hostess's confession. "Words do not undo what has been done," Imani replied firmly, her tone steady despite the deep hurt. "I need to know that you understand the impact of your actions." Her gaze did not waver as she looked directly at Ava, a silent challenge that demanded recognition of the pain inflicted on an innocent life. The conversation, brief as it was, carried the weight of an unspoken promise that this was only the beginning. In that moment, the characters found themselves at the crossroads of personal responsibility and the inevitable consequences that would ripple outwards. The terminal, with its ever-changing faces and constant motion, had become a stage where the lines between right and wrong blurred, leaving each individual to confront their own reflection in the eyes of another. As the day unfolded further, the passengers resumed their journeys, though many with a lingering sense of unease. The incident had left an imprint on the collective memory of those present. For some, it was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human emotion. For others, a call to question the systems that allowed such moments of unchecked impulse to occur. And for Ava, Imani, and little Malik, the events of that morning would mark the start of a confrontation that would challenge their beliefs and reshape their futures. The bustling terminal, with its mix of hurried steps and quiet reflections, slowly transformed into a space where every detail seemed to hold a deeper meaning. The interplay of light and shadow on the walls, the soft murmur of voices, and the distant echo of announcements combined to create an atmosphere that was both ordinary and charged with hidden tension. In this setting, every passenger became a witness to the unfolding drama, a drama that would soon reveal the true cost of a single impulsive act. Ava, still reeling from the moment, took a deep breath as she prepared to face the consequences. Each step she took was a step into the unknown, a journey that would force her to reckon with her past and the responsibilities of her present. She glanced at Daniel, silently asking for reassurance, though she knew that the path ahead would demand more than the comfort of friendly words. It would require a reckoning with her own inner turmoil, a recognition that even in a world ruled by rules, there was space for the raw pulse of human emotion. Meanwhile, Imani gathered her composure and lifted Malik into her arms. The child's small form fit securely against her, his cries gradually softening as the warmth of his mother's embrace offered a measure of solace. In that tender moment, the strength of a mother's love shone through, a quiet defiance against any attempt to diminish the worth of an innocent life. Imani's eyes, fixed on the horizon beyond the terminal, betrayed a promise that no matter what happened, she would fight to protect her child and her dignity. In the midst of all this, the world outside continued in its usual pace, unaware of the personal battles being waged within the walls of the terminal. The steady hum of traffic, the distant sound of construction, and the occasional call of a street vendor reminded everyone that life went on, even as individual lives were forever changed by moments of raw emotion and unexpected conflict. For now, the incident remained a single, charged moment in a long day, a moment that would grow in significance as its ripples began to spread. The characters, each caught in their own internal storms, knew that this was not an end, but rather the start of a path that would challenge their deepest beliefs. Ava, with her strict adherence to duty, would soon be forced to confront the cost of her actions. Imani, the strong yet gentle guardian of her child, was preparing to step into a role that would test her strength and resolve. And Malik, whose tears had drawn the attention of so many, became the silent symbol of innocence caught in the crossfire of adult decisions. As the morning light deepened into a more brilliant glow, the terminal filled with the subtle sounds of life returning to its routine. But beneath the surface, the events of the early hours lingered, a reminder that every moment held the potential for both harm and healing. The stage was set, the players in position, and the journey toward resolution had begun. Each breath taken by Ava, Imani, and even little Malik carried with it the promise of change, of lessons learned, and of the unyielding strength that emerges when people are forced to face the truth about themselves. In the hours that followed, as announcements echoed and new faces entered the terminal, the memory of that charged encounter would remain, a silent witness to the fragility and resilience of the human heart. The narrative of the day had been irrevocably altered, setting the tone for conflicts yet to come and for moments of unexpected understanding that could bridge even the widest divides. And so, as the terminal continued to pulse with life and movement, the story of that morning was just beginning, a story of confrontation, of unspoken truths, and of a journey that would take all those involved to places they had never imagined. The delicate interplay of emotion and duty, of pain and redemption, was poised to unfold in ways that would leave an everlasting mark on every soul present. A heavy stillness fell over the terminal after the initial shock had passed. The incident, now a live thread of whispered conversations and anxious glances, set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. In the hours that followed, the energy in the busy hall shifted. Where once there was the steady hum of travel and routine, now an undercurrent of unrest pulsed among the passengers and staff alike. Ava stood at the center of it all, her earlier actions replaying in her mind as she wandered through the terminal with measured, hesitant steps. Each footfall felt weighted, echoing her inner conflict. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, their silent judgment as palpable as the crisp morning air. She recalled the softness of Malik's cheek, the shock that had flashed in his eyes, and the burning determination in Imani's gaze. In that moment, Ava understood that this incident was not an isolated lapse. It was a spark that would ignite a struggle between duty and conscience. Daniel, who had lingered near the scene, took it upon himself to address the rising discontent. He moved through the crowd with a quiet urgency, his calm words attempting to soothe anxious murmurs. "Let us take a moment to settle down," he said in a low tone as he addressed a small group of concerned travelers. His voice carried a gentle firmness that contrasted with the volatility of the recent events. Yet, behind his eyes lay a troubled uncertainty. He knew that this simple act of reprimand was only a temporary measure against a far deeper current of discontent. Meanwhile, Imani gathered herself and stepped away from the small cluster of onlookers. Holding Malik close, she made her way to a quiet corner of the terminal, her pace steady but determined. Every step she took was a declaration of resolve. She had spent years building her airline from the ground up, forging a reputation on principles of respect and accountability. Today, her world was being challenged by the very people who were supposed to embody those values. With Malik nestled against her, Imani's face hardened with resolve. She would not let this incident pass without a proper reckoning. In a quiet office near the boarding gates, a meeting was already in progress. Senior airline staff and management had been alerted to the disturbance, and the discussion was fraught with tension. A middle-aged manager, his voice tight with concern, reviewed reports on the incident. "We have received multiple accounts of what happened," he explained to a small panel of colleagues. "There is an urgent need to address both the emotional fallout and the procedural errors that allowed such an event to occur." His words were measured, yet the undercurrent of unease was evident. The room was filled with faces that wore worry and apprehension like a second skin, each person silently weighing the possible consequences. Back in the terminal, Ava found herself cornered by her own thoughts. Her colleagues and passengers alike had begun to form their own versions of the story. Whispers spread like ripples on water, each retelling sharpening the edges of the tale. In the midst of the growing uproar, she could feel a storm building inside her, a mixture of regret, defiance, and a desperate need to justify her actions. "I followed the rules," she muttered under her breath as she paced the length of a quiet corridor. But the rules that had once provided her with a sense of order now seemed inadequate in the face of raw human suffering. The crowd's discontent was not limited to idle chatter. A group of passengers, emboldened by their collective anger, began to approach the service desk where Daniel was now stationed. Their voices rose in a soft but persistent crescendo. "We demand an explanation," one of them insisted, his tone firm yet measured. "How can you treat a child this way?" The words hung in the air, and as they did, Daniel felt the pressure of representing not just the airline, but a system that had clearly failed in this instance. With each question, the moral weight of the situation pressed down further, challenging the very framework of authority that had been so carefully maintained. Ava, compelled by both duty and an inner sense of remorse, attempted to approach the service desk. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, her eyes meeting those of the passengers who had gathered. "I am sorry," she began, her voice wavering as she tried to find the right words. "I did not wish to hurt anyone." Her apology was met with a mixture of skepticism and silent judgment. The words felt hollow in the face of a child's tears and a mother's unwavering resolve. Even as she spoke, Ava's mind raced with thoughts of her own upbringing, of times when strict discipline had been the only way to keep chaos at bay. But today, the simplicity of those rules was shattered by the complexity of human emotion. As the minutes stretched into an uncertain period of waiting and watching, Daniel made his way to Imani. He sought her out, understanding that the tension between her and Ava was at the heart of the unfolding crisis. "Ms. Imani," he said softly, "I want you to know that we are taking this very seriously. His words were an attempt to bridge the gap between the authority of the airline and the raw emotion of a mother protecting her child. Imani's eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, regarded him with a mix of suspicion and guarded hope. "Words will not heal this wound," she replied quietly, her tone firm and unyielding. "Actions must follow." Outside the confines of the terminal, a small group of reporters had gathered, drawn by the rising tension and the potential for a story that would grip the public's attention. Their presence added another layer of complexity to the day's events. A camera crew set up near the entrance, their lenses trained on the unfolding drama, as if to capture every nuance of the confrontation. The reporters' hushed voices mingled with the ambient sounds of the airport, each one waiting for the right moment to ask the question that would soon reverberate far beyond these walls. Inside, Ava's internal battle intensified. Every moment spent in the glaring scrutiny of public opinion left her feeling more exposed and isolated. She retreated to a small break room, where the silence offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of the irreparable mistake she had made. In that quiet space, her thoughts turned inward, memories of her own childhood, of a time when she too had felt small and misunderstood, surfaced unbidden. It was a stark reminder that the line between protector and oppressor was often thinner than one would believe. "I have to fix this," she whispered to herself, though the path to redemption was not clear. The echo of her words was lost in the stark, sterile atmosphere of the room. Meanwhile, Imani, holding Malik close, began to confront her own turbulent mix of anger and sorrow. Every step she took away from the terminal was laden with a determination to seek accountability. Her mind, sharp and unwavering, recalled every moment of the incident, every word spoken, every gesture made. She resolved that nothing would be left to chance. The struggle ahead was not just about one moment of anger, it was about reclaiming the dignity that had been so carelessly trampled. "He will not be made a victim today," she vowed silently, her grip on Malik tightening as she prepared to meet the challenges that lay ahead. In a quiet corner of the terminal, Daniel found a moment to speak with a fellow crew member who had watched the unfolding events with a heavy heart. "This incident is more than just a mistake," he said, his tone low and measured. "It is a breach of trust, and we must all bear responsibility for what has happened." His words were meant not to assign blame, but to acknowledge the shared burden that now rested on all their shoulders. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching security officer whose presence signaled that the situation was now being taken even more seriously. A small, impromptu assembly had formed near the service desk. Passengers, staff, and even a few curious onlookers were drawn together by the need for answers. The murmurs grew louder as the group began to exchange their own interpretations of the events. "I saw it all," one woman stated, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "It wasn't right for a child to be treated like that." Another passenger, a man in a worn jacket, added quietly, "We all have our own battles. Today, a child is caught in the middle." The shared sentiment was one of collective dismay and a call for justice that resonated deeply with everyone present. The tension continued to build as a senior airline representative arrived at the scene. His presence commanded immediate attention, and he moved with a deliberate calm that suggested experience in managing crises. "I understand that emotions are high," he began, his voice steady but without unnecessary flourish, "and we are here to make sure that every concern is heard." His statement, though intended to calm the situation, did little to soothe the hearts of those who had suffered. Imani's eyes met his, and in that brief exchange, the unspoken challenge was clear. Accountability must be more than a promise. For Ava, each moment felt like an eternity. She spent the next hour drifting between the glare of the terminal and the privacy of a secluded office. There, she was confronted with the full weight of the airline's internal inquiry. A small team had gathered not just to record her actions, but to understand the motivations behind them. "What were you thinking at the moment you struck Malik?" one of the investigators asked quietly, his gaze unblinking. Ava's voice faltered as she tried to explain, her words clashing with the raw reality of her remorse. I thought I was keeping order, she stammered, but I see now that I lost my way. Her confession was not enough to mend the breach that had occurred, but it was a first step in a long, uncertain journey toward atonement. As the investigation proceeded, more subtle threads of tension began to emerge. Daniel, now fully immersed in his role as mediator, found himself balancing between the expectations of his superiors and the silent pleas of the passengers. He knew that a simple apology or a brief explanation could not mend what had been broken. Instead, he dedicated himself to ensuring that every voice was heard, every grievance acknowledged. Late in the afternoon, when the terminal had quieted somewhat, Daniel approached a small group of passengers who had been waiting for answers. "I understand your pain," he said softly, "and I ask for your patience as we work to make things right." His words, spoken with genuine care, managed to calm a few uneasy hearts, though the scars of the incident were not so easily healed. Outside, the sky had shifted in tone as evening approached. A cool breeze swept through the terminal, carrying with it a hint of rain. The changing weather seemed to mirror the inner state of everyone involved. Imani, now seated in a quiet corner with Malik in her arms, watched the darkening clouds with a solemn expression. She recalled the day when she had built her airline with hope and determination, never imagining that one day she would have to defend not only her reputation, but the well-being of her child. "I will see this through," she murmured, her voice low but resolute. The promise was made not only to herself, but to every person who had been touched by the events of the day. As the terminal's lights grew brighter against the encroaching darkness, subtle hints of a larger conflict began to surface. There were murmurs about previous incidents that had been quietly swept under the rug, about the pressures of maintaining a flawless image in an unforgiving industry. Some passengers recalled stories of past errors and the difficult choices made in the name of efficiency. These whispers added layers to the day's events, suggesting that what had happened was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of deeper systemic issues. Ava, too, could sense that her personal struggle was tied to a much larger narrative, one in which the human cost of strict regulations was often hidden behind a polished facade. In a quiet hallway off the main terminal, a conversation unfolded between two airline staff members who had witnessed the scene. "We have always believed in the rules," one said, her voice trembling slightly, "but today, I wonder if we have forgotten the faces behind them." Her companion, a seasoned worker with lines of worry etched into his face, nodded slowly. "The rules are meant to protect us all," he replied. "Yet when they clash with our own hearts, the outcome is never simple." Their words, exchanged in hushed tones, echoed the sentiments of many who found themselves caught between duty and the human cost of following orders without question. By the time night settled fully over the terminal, the day's events had transformed into a charged narrative that would not soon be forgotten. Reporters continued to linger, their recordings capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama. The senior airline representative arranged for a brief statement, his voice measured as he addressed the gathered media. "We are aware of the concerns raised today," he said, "and we are committed to addressing every issue with the seriousness it demands." The statement, while official, did little to ease the hearts of those who had been directly affected. For many, it was a reminder that in a system built on order, the slightest deviation could lead to pain and unrest. In a small, dimly lit corridor, Ava found herself alone with her thoughts once again. The day's weight pressed on her, and she struggled to reconcile the woman she had always been with the person who had, in a single impulsive act, upset the balance of so many lives. She remembered her early days in the industry, when she had believed that strict adherence to rules was the only way to survive in a world that was often indifferent to kindness. But now, standing at the crossroads of regret and resolve, she began to question whether the cost of that discipline had been too high. "What have I done?" she whispered into the silence, a question that carried with it both self-reproach and a desperate plea for redemption. The investigation continued into the early hours of night. Daniel remained at his post, fielding questions from staff and passengers alike. His role had become that of a bridge between the rigid structures of the airline and the raw, human responses of those who felt wronged. Every conversation he had, every sincere apology he witnessed, reinforced the idea that this was more than a simple misstep. It was a moment that had exposed fault lines in the very foundation of the organization. "We must learn from this," he told a small group gathered near the service desk, "and work together to ensure that no one else is hurt." His words, humble and earnest, carried the weight of someone who understood that healing would be a slow, uncertain process. As midnight neared, the terminal, though less crowded, remained a stage for quiet confrontations and solitary reflections. Imani sat in a secluded lounge area, cradling Malik as he drifted in and out of tears and sleep. Her mind, however, was far from at rest. Thoughts of how the day would be remembered, how it would change the way the airline operated, and how it might force each person to examine their own actions swirled through her. "No more will this go unanswered," she vowed softly, her eyes fixed on the darkened windows that framed the quiet night outside. The promise in her voice was not just for her child. It was for every person who had ever suffered in silence. In the midst of the lingering chaos, a subtle shift began to emerge. The airline's internal inquiry, once a distant formality, started to reveal hints of deeper issues that had long been ignored. Staff members shared quiet exchanges, recalling moments when their own doubts had been silenced by the pressure to conform. The incident had become a mirror, reflecting the imperfections of a system that valued order over empathy. Ava, still reeling from the consequences of her actions, listened in disbelief as a senior colleague confided, "We have always followed the rules, but perhaps it is time we question whether those rules serve us all equally." Such murmurs of dissent, barely audible, carried the potential to upend long-held practices. Outside the terminal, the rain began to fall softly, its gentle patter on the glass a quiet counterpoint to the tumult within. The steady rhythm of droplets reminded everyone present that change was inevitable, even if it came at a painful price. Daniel, stepping outside for a brief moment of solitude, looked up at the dark sky and felt a stirring of resolve. This is not the end, he thought, his gaze tracing the path of a lone raindrop sliding down the pane. In that simple, unguarded moment, he realized that the day's events were not just a tragedy to be mourned. They were an invitation to reassess what mattered most. The following morning, as a pale light crept over the horizon, the terminal began to stir with renewed activity. The atmosphere was still heavy with the memories of the previous day, yet there was also a sense of cautious optimism among those who had been touched by the events. Passengers moved more slowly, as if each step carried the weight of a lesson learned. The airline's management announced a plan to hold a series of meetings with staff and affected customers, hoping to address grievances and chart a new course forward. The statement was careful and unadorned, promising accountability and tangible change without resorting to empty assurances. Ava, having spent a sleepless night wrestling with her conscience, emerged into the day with a subdued determination. Her eyes, red-rimmed from tears and fatigue, held a new depth, a recognition that the path ahead would be long and fraught with difficulty. She met Daniel in the corridor, and together they walked toward the meeting room where the airline's leadership had convened. "I need to understand what I have done," Ava said softly as they passed by a row of empty chairs, each one a silent witness to the unfolding saga. Daniel offered a small, reassuring nod. "We all must learn from this," he replied, his tone steady even as the tension in the air refused to dissipate. In that meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. The senior representative, now joined by several department heads, outlined the steps that would be taken to investigate the incident fully. Every word was chosen with care, aimed at restoring trust while acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Imani was invited to speak, her presence a reminder of the personal cost of the day's events. With Malik seated quietly by her side, she recounted the moment the slap had shattered her expectations. "My child deserves safety and respect," she stated firmly, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I will not allow anyone to treat him as if his pain is insignificant." The intensity of her gaze left no room for doubt. The meeting was as much about accountability as it was about reaffirming the values that had once guided the airline. Throughout the day, as discussions and negotiations carried on, it became increasingly clear that the incident was only the beginning of a longer struggle. The conversation shifted from mere damage control to an earnest debate about the principles that governed the airline's operations. Employees, many of whom had never before questioned the system, began to speak up. Their voices, soft at first and then growing more insistent, reflected a desire for change that had been simmering under years of routine. "We cannot let fear of reprisal keep us silent," one staff member remarked, her eyes shining with determination. "Today has shown us that we are all human and that our actions affect lives in ways we may never fully understand." As the day waned and the meeting drew to a close, a tentative plan was formed. A commitment to review the policies and practices that had led to the day's tragic unfolding. For Ava, the process was deeply personal. She knew that her future at the airline would depend on her willingness to face the consequences and learn from the mistakes that had cost so much. Daniel's steady presence offered her a measure of comfort as they stepped out into the cool evening air together. "We have a long road ahead," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers in a silent pact of understanding. "But every step we take can help mend what has been broken." His words, simple and sincere, resonated deeply with Ava as she prepared herself for the uncertain journey forward. In the days that followed, the terminal became a microcosm of a society forced to confront its own limitations. Conversations in the waiting areas and on boarding bridges revolved around the need for fairness and understanding, and the recognition that the balance between duty and compassion was delicate indeed. Imani, now a quiet yet powerful presence in the midst of these discussions, spent her time advocating for changes that would prevent such incidents from recurring. Her interactions with fellow passengers and staff were marked by a steady insistence on responsibility, a quality that slowly began to shift the tone of the debates. Every evening, as the terminal slowly emptied and the hum of activity faded into a quiet murmur, Ava retreated to a small, dim room set aside for crew members. There, in the solitude of the night, she would reflect on the day's events, often scribbling notes into a worn journal. The pages became a testament to her inner struggle, a raw, unfiltered account of regret, self-examination, and a desperate desire to make amends. "I must find a way to heal," she wrote one night, the words etched with both sorrow and a tentative hope. The journey was far from over, and each written word was a step toward understanding the cost of her actions. As the investigation unfolded over the course of a week, the ripple effects of that fateful morning became evident. Stories emerged among the staff, tales of overlooked hardships, quiet sacrifices, and unspoken fears that had built up over years of rigid enforcement. In small groups, employees exchanged looks of recognition as they realized that the incident was a mirror reflecting a broader reality. The conversation, once constrained by a strict adherence to protocol, began to open up. There was a cautious willingness to acknowledge that the rules, which had once seemed absolute, could sometimes cause unintended harm. One afternoon, as soft rain tapped against the large windows of the terminal, Daniel found himself in a long conversation with a junior attendant who had been particularly affected by the incident. "I never imagined that following orders could hurt someone so deeply," the young attendant confessed, his voice trembling with the weight of his newfound understanding. "I always believed that our work was about keeping things in order, but now I see that order without care can become cold and unyielding." Daniel listened intently, his eyes reflecting the pain of shared experience. "We are all learning," he said gently, "and sometimes our mistakes force us to look at ourselves in ways we have never done before." Even as the internal inquiry continued, the public began to take notice. The media, having captured the raw emotions of that day, began to question the established narrative. Editorials appeared in local papers discussing the responsibilities of those in positions of power and the need to prioritize the welfare of the individual over a sterile adherence to policy. Passers-by in the terminal began to speak with a newfound awareness, a recognition that the events they had witnessed were not isolated, but part of a larger conversation about the value of compassion in a system designed for efficiency. One evening, as the terminal's neon lights flickered softly against the darkness, Imani and Daniel crossed paths once more. Standing near a row of empty seats, they exchanged a few measured words that held the promise of future dialogue. "I have seen how pain can reshape our lives," Imani said quietly, her eyes steady as she regarded him. "My son's tears have opened a door that many have long kept closed." Daniel's reply was equally restrained, yet his words carried the weight of a shared commitment. "We must carry this lesson forward," he said, "so that no one else endures what we have seen today." Their brief exchange, though simple, resonated deeply with those who listened from a distance, a silent pledge to learn from the events that had so thoroughly shaken their world. As the days turned into a week, the terminal slowly began to regain its rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, the conversations that had been sparked by that single fateful act continued to echo. The air was filled with the quiet determination of those who had witnessed the incident, of those who had experienced firsthand the delicate interplay between authority and empathy. Every step taken by a staff member, every whispered word among passengers, was now laden with the knowledge that change had been set in motion. For Ava, each day was a test of her resolve. She dedicated herself to a daily routine of reflection and quiet acts of kindness, attempting to bridge the gap between her past actions and the hope for a better future. Though the weight of the incident pressed down on her, she began to find small moments of connection, a shared smile with a colleague, a gentle word exchanged with a passenger that offered a glimmer of redemption. In her journal, she recorded these moments with a careful honesty that was both painful and necessary. "I must learn to be better," she wrote, "not only for myself, but for those who have placed their trust in me." Throughout this time, Imani's determination did not waver. She continued to advocate for a re-examination of the policies that had allowed such an incident to occur. Her voice, once filled with the anger of a mother protecting her child, now carried a measured insistence that even the most rigid systems must bend in the face of human need. Meetings were held, and proposals were discussed, conversations that touched on the very heart of what it meant to care for the vulnerable. In the soft glow of a terminal office late one afternoon, Imani met with a group of concerned staff members. "We must listen to each other," she said plainly, her eyes locked on those who had once seemed distant and detached. "When our hearts are put before our procedures, we all stand to gain a greater understanding of what truly matters." Her words, delivered without flourish, sparked a series of thoughtful exchanges that slowly began to reshape the culture of the organization. Even as the formal inquiries continued, there was a sense among many that something greater was emerging, a recognition that this incident had opened the door to long overdue change. In the quiet moments between flights and busy rushes of passengers, stories began to circulate. Stories of empathy found in unexpected places, of staff members standing up for one another, and of a community coming together to address a shared pain. The echoes of that turbulent morning could be heard in every hushed conversation, each one a reminder that the cost of a single act could ripple through the lives of many. Late one night, after the terminal had emptied and the only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning, Ava found herself alone in a small office. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of a desk lamp and the scattered pages of her journal. As she reread her words, the truth of her experience sank in. She realized that the incident was not simply about a mistake made in haste, it was about the responsibility that each person carried to honor the dignity of another. "I must face what I have done," she whispered, her voice carrying both sorrow and a cautious hope. It was a promise to herself that the path ahead would be one of learning and of true understanding, a promise that she knew would require courage and time. The days passed slowly, each one marked by quiet progress and lingering pain. The terminal, a place once defined solely by movement and schedules, had become a space of reflection, A reminder that even in the midst of routine, a single moment could alter the course of many lives. The incident had woven itself into the fabric of everyday life, a constant reminder that rules without heart can never truly serve those who live by them. In the midst of this ongoing struggle, a subtle shift began to take hold among the airline staff. Conversations that had once been stifled by fear or indifference now flowed freely. Colleagues began to share their own experiences, their own moments of regret and revelation. Even those who had once stood firmly behind the strict enforcement of policy found themselves questioning whether the system they had served was built on a foundation that truly respected the individual. In quiet gatherings during breaks, staff members spoke with a tenderness that had been absent in the past. "I never knew we could hurt someone so deeply without meaning to," one crew member confessed, his voice soft in the hush of the early morning. The shared understanding that followed was a balm to some of the raw wounds left by that day. As the inquiry moved toward its conclusion, the airline's leadership began to outline steps for a future that promised not only accountability, but a genuine effort to listen to the voices of those affected. New procedures were introduced, ones that prioritized personal interactions and real accountability over rigid rule following. The changes were gradual, measured by the collective will of a staff that had been forced to reckon with the impact of a single moment. For Imani, these changes were a small but welcome sign that her suffering had not been in vain. In one of the final sessions of the week, as she addressed a room of employees, she said quietly, "Let this be a lesson to us all. No system is perfect when it does not see the face behind the rule." Her words, delivered without embellishment, resonated deeply with everyone present. By the time the week drew to a close, the tension that had defined the past several days had begun to ease into a tentative calm. The terminal resumed its busy rhythm, and passengers moved once more with a sense of purpose. Yet, for those who had lived through the crisis, nothing would ever be quite the same. The incident had left an indelible mark, a reminder that every action, no matter how small, carries with it the potential to change lives. And as the lights of the terminal shone brightly in the early hours of a new day, each person present carried forward a lesson born from pain and tempered by hope. In this unfolding chapter of conflict and change, the struggles of Ava, Imani, Malik, Daniel, and all those around them became intertwined with a larger truth. Their lives, once defined by routine and regulation, were now a testament to the power of facing one's mistakes, to the strength found in acknowledging vulnerability, and to the possibility of rebuilding in the aftermath of hurt. As the terminal doors opened to welcome another day of travel and transformation, it was clear that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be real, raw, and a step toward healing that could not be ignored. And so the narrative of that turbulent day grew into a broader story, a story of everyday people forced to confront the cost of their actions, to learn the delicate balance between order and humanity, and to find within themselves the courage to change. The rising tension of the hours past had given way to a quiet resolve, a mutual understanding that though the pain might linger, it could also lead to a future defined by care and accountability. In the soft light of morning, as the terminal buzzed once more with life and movement, each individual carried with them the lesson that sometimes the hardest moments pave the way for the most honest reflections of the heart. Every conversation, every shared glance, and every quiet moment of introspection wove together to form the next chapter in this unfolding saga, a chapter that promised not an end, but the continuation of a journey toward better understanding and deeper connection among all who had been touched by that one fateful act. A hush fell over the crowded boardroom as the final pieces of the day's tumult converged into one decisive moment. The harsh fluorescent lights revealed tense faces, stern expressions mixed with quiet determination, eyes glistening with unshed tears and fierce resolve. In this room, every individual present knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Imani stood at the head of the long table, cradling little Malik gently in her arms. Her face, marked by both sorrow and steely resolve, commanded the room even before she spoke. Today, She would no longer be seen as just a grieving mother or a bystander to injustice. In her heart burned a fierce commitment to protect the innocence of her child and to restore honor to a system that had long forgotten the human face behind every rule. Across from her, a group of board members sat in rigid silence. Their eyes shifted uncomfortably as they tried to reconcile the public outcry with the need to safeguard the airline's reputation. For years, they had worked behind closed doors, making decisions in sterile rooms where numbers and procedures reigned. But now, the raw pain and dignity of a mother, the remorse in a troubled air hostess, and the quiet strength of a mediator had shattered that illusion. Ava, once the firm enforcer of routine and order, had walked into the room with head bowed and heart heavy. Her usual crisp uniform felt like a shroud as she took her place near Imani, her eyes searching the faces of those who had once admired her strict control. Today, she was forced to confront not only the damage done by her impulsive act, but also the harsh reality of a system that had driven her to that breaking point. In the silence that followed, her voice emerged softly, trembling with the weight of regret. "I hurt a child," she began, her words echoing in the stillness. "I lost sight of what truly matters." Before anyone could respond, Daniel stepped forward. His presence, calm yet filled with quiet authority, cut through the tension like a ray of light in a dark corridor. "We have all been part of a machine that values rules above people," he said, his tone plain and sincere. "Today, we stand at a crossroads. It is time to ask, are we protecting a system, or are we protecting the lives that make up that system?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and even some of the most skeptical board members looked away, as if embarrassed by their own complicity. The air was heavy with the unspoken truth that many had long ignored, that rigid procedures could sometimes hurt more than they healed. At that moment, one of the board members, a man known simply as Mr. Collins, cleared his throat and spoke in a measured tone. "We must consider that the incident may have been isolated, a mistake made under pressure." His words, intended to downplay the gravity of the situation, instead fanned the flames of discontent. Imani's eyes narrowed as she replied in a clear, steady voice, "A mistake that has cost us a child's comfort and a mother's peace. I will not allow this harm to be swept under the rug." Her words sparked a ripple of shock across the table. It was then that Daniel, who had been quietly gathering his thoughts, reached into a folder at his side and slowly produced a stack of documents. "There is more you need to see," he said, laying the papers on the table. The documents contained detailed records of complaints, internal memos, and a trail of evidence that painted a damning picture of policies that had prioritized efficiency over human care for far too long. A heavy silence settled again as the board members exchanged worried glances. One by one, the truth in the documents began to cast its long shadow over their carefully constructed narratives. It was clear now that this was not an isolated case of misdirected anger, but a symptom of a deeper neglect, a system that had lost its way by forgetting the faces and lives behind the policies. Then came the moment that no one could have predicted. As Imani's eyes swept over the assembled faces, a quiet knock sounded at the heavy wooden door. In walked a tall figure in a dark suit, his steps measured and deliberate. He paused at the threshold, surveying the room with an intensity that made every heart skip a beat. With an air of quiet authority, he removed his cap, revealing a familiar face that caused an involuntary gasp among the staff. It was Ms. Renee, a respected government inspector known for her uncompromising stand on public service and fairness. Ms. Renee had been a silent observer to the unfolding crisis, her visit initially intended to assess routine operations. But as the day grew darker and the storm of events escalated, she had realized that something far more serious was afoot. "I am here to ensure that justice is served," she announced, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable force. "The evidence presented today will not be ignored, and I will work with you all to reform practices that have allowed this hurt to fester." Her unexpected arrival shifted the power dynamics completely. The board members, once confident in their control, now found themselves facing not only the raw emotion of a wronged mother and a repentant employee, but also the unwavering authority of a government inspector with the power to hold them accountable. The room pulsed with the tension of a long-awaited reckoning. Mr. Collins, his voice now shaky, tried to regain control. "We need to review our procedures and take corrective measures," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Imani's eyes burned with determination as she stepped forward once more, addressing both the board and Ms. Renee. "I have spent my life building this airline on the promise of care and respect," she declared, her voice rising steadily. "But today I see that promises have been broken. I stand here not just as a mother, but as the owner who will no longer allow a system that values numbers over souls." The confrontation reached its peak as Ava, who had been listening in silence, suddenly spoke with a newfound strength. "I have been part of this machine that made me forget that each rule carries a weight beyond a simple checkmark," she said. "I am sorry for the pain I caused, and I will stand with you as we demand a system that treats people with the dignity they deserve." In that charge moment, the room shifted. What had begun as a meeting to contain a scandal was transforming into a call for real change, a moment where personal remorse merged with collective responsibility. Daniel's steady presence lent strength to every word, and even those board members who had resisted the truth began to nod slowly, understanding that change was inevitable. Ms. Renee looked around at the faces in the room and spoke with a tone that brooked no argument. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter. I will ensure that a full investigation is carried out, and the findings will lead to a complete overhaul of practices that have long caused harm. This is your chance to set things right, to truly serve the people who trust you with their lives." The board members, now caught between the weight of evidence and the unyielding moral force of Imani and her allies, had little choice but to concede. One by one, they agreed to set up an independent review and to accept the recommendations that Ms. Renee would soon propose. In that moment, the hidden authority of truth and accountability emerged victorious, turning the tide of power in a way that no one had imagined. In the days that followed, the story of that fateful morning spread far beyond the walls of the airport. News outlets picked up on the dramatic showdown, and public opinion rallied around the idea that systems must be built on care, not just on rules. The airline, once a symbol of rigid order, found itself at the center of a movement calling for deep and lasting reform. The changes that were set in motion began to ripple outward, reaching every corner of the organization, and even influencing other companies facing similar challenges. Ava, once burdened by guilt and isolation, started a quiet journey of personal redemption. She attended counseling sessions and participated in training programs aimed at understanding the true meaning of service and empathy. With time, she began to transform her approach to her work, learning to balance the need for order with the equally important need to care for the people around her. Each day, she took small steps toward healing, her actions reflecting a deep commitment to never again allow anger to override compassion. Imani, though still carrying the pain of that first, shattering moment, found strength in her role, not just as a mother, but as a leader determined to bring about change. She made herself available to her staff and customers alike, listening to their stories and using their experiences as a guide to reform outdated practices. Her journey was not an easy one. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but her unwavering determination to protect the vulnerable and restore fairness never faltered. In time, the airline began to regain its lost trust, not because of empty promises, but because real changes were taking root in its core. Daniel continued to serve as a bridge between different worlds, the rigid structures of the airline and the living, breathing reality of human experience. His role expanded as he became a trusted advisor to both management and staff, his quiet wisdom a constant reminder that accountability and care must walk hand in hand. His words, spoken with gentle conviction, encouraged others to speak up and share their own truths, slowly dismantling the old ways that had once silenced them. Ms. Renee's involvement had a lasting impact as well. Her investigation, not only led to sweeping changes within the airline, but also set a precedent for how similar institutions would be held accountable in the future. The reforms she helped implement became a model for others, proving that when those in power are challenged by the truth, the very foundations of an organization can be rebuilt to serve a higher purpose. In the final hours of that long day, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the terminal quieted once more, Imani stood alone by a large window. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle, each one a small spark of hope in the darkness. Holding Malik close, she gazed out at the world and allowed herself a moment of reflection. "We have learned something precious today," she murmured softly, "that every action, every decision touches lives in ways we may never fully understand. We must never forget that each of us is responsible for the well-being of others." Her words, spoken to the empty room as much as to herself, carried a call to all who would listen. It was a call to remember that justice and compassion must guide every decision, that no person's pain is too small to be overlooked, and that the strength to change lies in the courage to admit when we are wrong. As the night deepened, the boardroom, once a chamber of cold procedures and distant decisions, had transformed into a place where hope and accountability took root. The changes set in motion that day would echo far into the future, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, the light of truth can guide us to a better way of living together. In the days and months that followed, the community around the airline felt a shift in the air. Passengers spoke of their experiences not with bitterness, but with cautious optimism. Staff members, once silent in the face of authority, began to share their ideas for improvement. And every time Malik's small, resilient smile broke through his tears, it was a reminder that even after great pain, the promise of renewal was always within reach. The journey toward healing was not complete in a single day. It would take time, persistence, and the collective effort of many to rebuild trust and transform old ways into new paths paved with understanding. Yet, in the heart of that terminal, every person who had witnessed the events knew that change had begun. It had started with a moment of raw emotion, a single act that shattered the illusion of perfection, and had grown into a powerful movement for justice and care. As the final meeting of the crisis drew to a close, Ava, Imani, Daniel, and even the once reluctant board members stood together in the fading light. They had come to see that true strength lay not in unyielding rules, but in the ability to listen, to feel, and to act when the need arose. In that shared understanding was a promise for the future, one where no one would be left unheard, where every cry for help would be met with action, and where the dignity of every human life would be honored. Looking out at the horizon, Imani whispered a message that would live on long after the day was done. Let this be our legacy, a promise to care, to listen, and to change when it matters most. And as the terminal slowly emptied and the echoes of the day settled into memory, that promise spread beyond the walls of the building, inviting every listener to reflect on their own roles in the grand tapestry of life. In that reflective silence, a gentle call to each person resonated. Think of the lives you touch with every word and every action. Consider how small moments of remorse and courage can lead to lasting change. And remember that while we may all be part of a larger system, each of us has the power to reshape it from the heart outwards. For the passengers who had come and gone, for the staff who had taken part in this turning point, and for the community that would carry these lessons forward, the story did not end with a single act of anger or a moment of regret. Instead, it continued to unfold in every act of kindness, every step taken toward true accountability, and every quiet moment when we choose to see the person behind the rule. The terminal, once a stage for routine travel, had become a symbol of transformation. And as the final light of day faded, the promise of tomorrow shone bright, a promise that when we stand together with honesty and compassion, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Share your thoughts on what matters most in our shared journey. Let your voice be heard, and know that every step we take together is a step toward a kinder, fairer world. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light.